Ascended Masters, Archangelics, Lords of Light are all beings who have evolved into a layer of awareness that is greater than the world around you. Where we're playing in Mastering Alchemy is an engagement with this higher level of consciousness that basically is saying, let us explain how this works. So many of you who are listening to this conversation, there's something in the heart that says there's more, there's something else to this.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me again today. I am really glad to ask Jim to come back today to talk about these beings of light, the Archangelics, the Lords of Light, and the Ascended Masters. Who are they and what they're all about? So welcome, Jim. Thank you for joining me again.
Hi, Vida. Nice to talk with you again.
Excellent. Excellent. I love this whole concept around removing labels that we're talking a lot about. And there are a lot of labels around the idea of what are angels? What are archangelics? What are beings of light? What are what even is ascended masters? I have so many questions. So let's dive in. Can you give us some kind of a baseline? What are we looking at with this, all of these pieces?
So in consciousness, kind of all that is and all that has been, one of the things that we know is we basically frame our references based on biblical, religious-based thinking. And one of the aspects of a lot of that religious-based thinking, no matter where it comes from, in my observation, is there's lots of little stories that are all compiled into a larger story that says this is how it always was. But in those stories, you wind up leaving out an awful lot. Other people's stories, other people's point of view, so it is the same thing that happens here with the angelics and all of the beings. And so Ascended Masters, Archangelics, Lords of Light are all beings who have kind of ascended, evolved, let's use that word, into a layer of awareness that is greater than the world around you, walking around day in and day out. And so to a great extent, when I talk to people about consciousness and all of the aspects of consciousness, I generally get a very limited point of reference. Where we're playing in Mastering Alchemy is an engagement with this higher level of consciousness that basically is saying, let us explain how this works. And so many people playing in spiritual experience today, if you said channeling, everybody goes, oh yeah, channeling. It's kind of when something comes through you and talks. Well, it's really no different in terms of the Archangelics are basically speaking through channels on one hand, just like in Mastering Alchemy, Joan Walker became the vehicle for the Archangelics and others to talk through, to have conversations with me in terms of that experience was, let us tell you how this evolution works step by step. And they did that continuously. So Archangelics, Lords of Light, ascended beings. Let's start with the ascended beings. They're basically you and me who have managed their conscious awareness to a point where they live in the world, but not of the world. They're not distracted by all the noise. And they begin to ask more questions, like so many of you who are listening to this conversation, is there's something in the heart that says there's more. There's something else to this. Whether you say, I don't come from this planet, I don't know what I'm doing here, I don't fit. What is that? And all that is an awareness that there's something more. And in that something more, these different representations of consciousness in their own evolution are communicating with you and me and everybody else. So the Archangelics, let's talk Ascended Masters. Ascended Masters, kind of the next evolution of awareness that is attained. Let's just kind of keep it simple. I'm not trying to say some truth, but just in a simple way. The Archangelics seem to be ascended beings, or seem to be beings that aren't playing the game of physical bodies. They haven't played in this density for the most part, and they play in a strata of consciousness that is within the thought of the creator. And so everything is in layers. And that starts from this kind of the story that Archangel Uriel said right from the beginning, Mastering Alchemy, that the creator wished to know itself and began to experience itself in many different forms. And my simple take on that, reached into itself and created the creator gods and the Elohim and the lords of light and the Archangelics, and they created others. And so this whole evolution of consciousness in non-physical form has evolved forever. And so we're just at a point where we're beginning to step into this next aspect of our own evolution, our own ascensions, and that intelligence is engaging with us here in Mastering Alchemy directly, but everybody is having access to these different aspects of consciousness.
Okay, you've kind of taken everything and blown it like massive big picture here. So I want to see if I can bring it down. My awareness of what I have of my world, or the closest thing I've been exposed to, is, let's say, down to ascended masters. So we have records of, say, Yeshua for the Christian religion. You hear about him. You've heard about some amazing yogi masters and people that can do incredible things and healings that way. And you hear about those things. They're all things that you read. And you're like, yeah, okay, there's, in some cases, people have been lucky enough to actually meet some of these incredible people. So we have stories and accounts that they existed. So you have some level of a baseline of okay, so that's possible to kind of just attain this level of self-mastery, if that would be the right word. And then on top of that, you have, and so your connection to them would be the next layer. And then we have these things, beings of light, archangelics, lords of light, where we have them communicating with us, but it's not in a physical way or a tangible way I can connect to. So can you kind of talk about how these layers and my disconnection or connection to understanding of all the layers of consciousness, or all that is, or the creator looking into himself and creating gods? Those are big words. So can you help break that down?
First, what I watch is people who are on a path, on a journey to know themselves. They begin to bump into different things outside of the religious teachings that most human beings have access to. And most human beings kind of stop in some aspect of that religious seeking, I think. Actually, let me step back from that. That's not correct. Everybody seeks their own pathway, and they have access to information from that pathway, whether it's the Bible or the Quran or whatever the teaching is. But many people in spiritual terms wind up bumping into spiritual writings, the life and teachings of the masters of the Far East, and a whole set of stories that are like mind-boggling that you never heard before. Or Saint Germain and the I Am teachings is a whole nother set of volumes of books that basically say this is how it all works. And so you bump into those kind of beings. There are many, many people who channel Kuthumi, for example, one of the ascended masters. And so you have a lot of channeled writings that basically say this is how it all works. And what people will do is gravitate to some of those aspects of those writings or those teachings, and then they begin to follow it. And what happens is you hear a statement that says, well, here's kind of how it works. And what I find is I've heard hundreds and thousands of those, this is how it works. And some work for me and some don't work for me. And so my sense of my own evolution is listening to all these different points of reference. And then that internal guidance system in the heart basically says, I can walk with this. I can allow this. I can play with this. This is interesting. I'm going to ask more questions. And so the information, whether it comes from Archangelics or Ascended Masters, is really that pathway that each human being says, this works for me. And then they begin to play with it. And then there's more pieces that I add to it. And a whole personality gets scripted by the information that we're listening to or we're dabbling in. Could be the Bible, it could be the Quran, it could be anything that somebody says, yes, this resonates with me. A lot of the teachers, Ascended Masters or Angelics or Archangelics or the Lords of Light or the Elohim, all names of groups, layers of consciousness that are evolving in their own right. And so we're just becoming conscious of being conscious. And so there's that whole level of information is beginning to present itself more and more today in this time we're playing in.
So you're talking about the level of consciousness that's becoming more aware. Is the consciousness the ascended beings that are talking more to us, or we have access to them more? Is that what you're referencing here?
You know, it's like, where do you start in this question? So if you start at creator and you make align with the thought that the creator is all there is. There's just creator. There's nothing creator and more. There's creator. And so everything that is evolving is part of the creator's creation coming into a reality for the creator's creation. So you, me, are aspects of the creator wanting to create another aspect of itself, another experience, another possibility. And so you emerge from the light of the creator and the thought of the creator. And then you get to kind of play out your puzzle piece, which is reflecting back to the creator what the creator is. That's the task of each one of us. We don't quite know that in those words, but that's really kind of what goes on. And as you start to become more engaged with your own personal evolution, you start to realize that's my task, is to reflect light back to the creator. That is what the creator is. And so excitement and joy and beauty and well-being and smile and laughter, you know what that all feels like. You also know what anger and resentment and grief feels like. And so in the third dimensional game, we're kind of sorting through all of that to find our way to the place where that joy and laughter really exists, which is all that really exists once we start getting out of the human rational mind. So deviation from what is ascended master. But in the guidance to getting to that place is where these different communications from consciousness at different levels, at where you can hear your own next step, that next step is communicated. And so as you begin to play at that, it gets more and more available because you start to listen more and more to that kind of radio channel that's giving you the message.
It is interesting to watch on how many different people like to, or how they resonate with certain things. So some people are all about the Archangelics, and it's enjoyable. You'll hit people and bump into people and they'll be like, I just love Mary. Mary's my favorite. I love, granted she's not an angel, but or I love Gabriel, or whatever it is. There's certain things that people become really connected to and attached with, and that's interesting. You're talking about how they are a step on the pathway to kind of understanding things and how people like to play things out. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the differences between, say, an ascended master, archangelic, lords of light? What are these different layers of consciousness or information, people, beings of light?
So I would say the step from where we are to ascended masters is really a step of your own personal evolution and ascension. You begin to know more and more, and you begin to crowd out the noise. You just simply, I could go to war and politics and all of those kind of things, but they really aren't about me. they're events and movies to go to, but they're not the movie that I'm choosing to go to. And so that choosing not to go to third dimensional noise, if you would, begins to be, let's say, a step on the path. And you start to eliminate the things that don't feel good, don't support you, don't give you a sense of quiet, expanded awareness. Ascended masters are those beings that have been playing in that space for a long time. And maybe they've come back in reincarnation from where they left off the last time, and they get more conscious and more conscious. And then they begin to understand what's possible. And so that in that what's possible frame of reference, it's that ability to start to step into an elevated aspect of body, light body being the reference that we play with in Mastering Alchemy, learning how to change how the brain functions, learning how to change the messaging system in the neuron portion of the nervous system, learn how to begin to access that 8th, 9th, 10th chakra, where there's just all this information that you don't know about when you're just playing third dimension, go to the store, go to the bar, wherever you go. And so you begin to crowd out the noise, and it's as if more light starts to present itself, more information, more knowledge. If you said, where did you get that idea that you just talked about? Quite often it's like, I don't know. I've always had it, or I've just thought this for a long time. Many times you've never thought that before. And what happens is you start to recreate yourself. You put the wiring back together, and all of a sudden you begin to remember what you've always known, but you've forgotten. And more information. And I think that's the space where the ascended masters step into a different strata of consciousness and begin to live from that strata of consciousness. I mean, think about your life. There's layers to your life. There's aspects of your life that you would not go back to and live again. Some of those were really kind of fun things, but you aren't going to go back to be a third grader again. And so you constantly keep evolving in your own awareness. That ascended masters seems to be the next step that we're all beginning to move towards.
This is really interesting. And as we're on our path, we have these teachers or beings of light or information, but a lot of people, what you were just pointing at, don't necessarily identify it as, hey, guess what? Gabriel just showed up. He gave me the best idea ever. A lot of that doesn't happen. So can you talk a little bit about that inner guiding system? Who is that? Is it me? Is it the angels?
Well, let's look at it this way. Let's say you are an up-and-coming person in a major, large corporation. And all of a sudden you begin to get noticed by some of the management. And the management starts to see an opportunity to kind of say hello to you and begin to nurture you into a larger piece of information. And then at some point, you've kind of mastered that piece of information, and they say, let's move on to this next level. And you move on to this next level. And so that level of management noticing you, in my simple analogy, is this space where you are so passionate as a spiritual being to grow in this experience, this game that we're playing called third dimension, and then stepping out of it and basically having a wealth of knowledge. And so you've been accumulating that in lifetimes after lifetimes. And here you are at a particular lifetime where there's an opportunity to really hone that skill of getting quiet and recognizing there's more. There's more. And so as you begin to say, I want more, you get heard. And so all of a sudden, this next level of consciousness, whether it's the Archangelics or the Lords of Light, they're actually the same thing with two different job descriptions. It's a simple way of saying it as they say it. It's, and when we're the Archangelics, we are playing at this configuration of consciousness and talking from it. But when we're the Lords of Light, we're the technicians. We're playing with light and magnetism and the electricity of creation. Just different job description, but same levels of consciousness. Where we are beginning to play, if you take the names away, the labels away, and just simply begin to say, I would like help, and align yourself in that quietness, that help shows up. Is it necessary, whether it's Michael or Metatron or Gabriel or no? It basically says, how do you do this? It'd be like if you were in the store and trying to figure out which can of soup to buy to make a recipe and said, anybody know anything about this? Somebody would say, oh, I did that once. And here you use the tomato soup. And then they walk away. So that's kind of how this engagement with these spiritual beings, if you would, are playing out in everybody's awareness today. There's a lot of people on the planet that can't hear it, but there's also a lot of people on the planet that are waking up and want it. And they're starting to ask more questions. And so that's one of the great parts about mastering alchemy is there's no truth. There's no, you have to believe. It's just like, here, try this, the tomato soup, try this out. What happens? And so in the nature of mastering alchemy, it was the Archangelics that came forth and said, there's a path that can be walked that opens up awareness for humanity to step out of this third dimensional game. Do you want to play? And so we set it up, and they come week after week and basically say, here's how you do this. And so the relationship of mastering alchemy to the Archangelics is how to. It's all about how do you do it? Not let's talk about, oh, it's going to be wonderful in the fifth dimension someday. Well, how do I get there? And that's a question that most people are beginning to ask more and more is, how do I do this? What do I look at? How does it work?
Well, let's extend that question. So let's say I would like to know more about the Archangelics, or I'd like to connect with an ascended master. How can I go about doing this? What advice would you give? And my second part I want to add to that, can you also address the labels that happen with, I know who Mary is, she had Jesus, they did this was their experience in their lifetime. There's so much noise around the stories of this consciousness intelligence that really seems to get in the way. Like, well, actually, I'm not interested in that story. Or that doesn't resonate with me. I don't like that. How do we move past these kind of bumps?
So where did all that come from? And it came out of a limited body of knowledge, okay, that basically said, this is the right answer. I mean, how many people read the Bible, for example, and say, I know what this is. I know the game. I know how it works. Well, all that is one little snippet of story. And then you begin to realize that in the case of Christianity, back in 505 BC, the Pope didn't like half the stories and threw them out of the scripting that became the Bible. So my story is the right story, so you better listen to my story. And then that got lost in translation years after years after years. And then everybody said, well, this is the truth. The piece that's going on right now that's kind of interesting is people are looking for their own truth. They're starting to turn inside. That's why you've seen so many people step away from religions over the last number of years, because they want to know their truth. And so this is the space where that begins to occur more and more today. We're in a transition. We're moving. It's like you're starting a new day, and the new day is arriving and growing and getting brighter and brighter, and it's here. But it's not the story of yesterday. It's a new story. And if I pause and kind of look around, it's really a nice day. And it feels nice. And it used to be cold, and now it's kind of warm. That's never been in the reality of the book before. And all of a sudden you have a new experience. And that's kind of what is being unfolded. The Archangelics and the consciousness is basically just presenting itself for you to step into and ask a question and get an answer.
I really, really love that. I think that new story, because, we've heard all these old stories. We've heard this is how it is, and we are seeking a new truth. What is my truth? What is it that I want to know. And what the heck are the Archangelics? What the heck is an Ascended Master? Who was that? So learning and understanding that on a personal level is big to move into that space. So what recommendation would you have for someone who's just kind of like, how do I go about knowing my own truth, knowing who these people are when my engagement level basically happens inside my head where I'm talking to myself? So how do you move through that?
Yeah, what I'm watching is people are waking up. You know, it's like the sun's coming up and people are waking up and realizing there's more. So there is more questions being asked and more people are saying, where do I get this information? Where do I learn it? And they're going to bump into it. There's no the place to go for all the right answers. Everybody is kind of bumping around on their own pathway. And it may show up as a piece of junk mail that, oh, here's an interesting book you should buy. It may show up in a conversation that some friend is talking about some weird thing that their friend was talking about. You go, oh, I like that weird thing. You don't know where it's going to come from. The point of receptivity is asking to receive the information, wanting to experience the experience of knowing more. It's being curious. It's paying attention. It's simply beginning to step back and pause and allow something more than the noise of the day and the world to be your attention point. And like I said, the day is getting brighter and there's more and more. The shadows are disappearing. There's more opportunity to choose. Is it an archangel? Is it the Lord of Light? Is it Mary? Is it Jesus? Doesn't matter. If you say, this is who I would like to say hello, that energy will say hello. So if we just begin to allow the curiosity to unfold, the answer begins to appear where the question is asked.
Excellent. And I don't think that's the best note to end on. So Jim, thank you very much. Excellent.
My pleasure.